The alarm at the refinery screamed hydrocarbon leak, a sound that usually triggers adrenaline, not dread. But when the new captain ordered a water strike on a chemical fire, I stepped in to save lives. Instead of thanking me, he ripped my badge off my chest and escorted me out. As I drove away, I watched a small flame grow into an inferno that would burn for 5 days. The klaxon at the refinery didn't just ring, it vibrated in your teeth. It was 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday when the sensors in Sector 4 tripped. I was in the break room, mid-sip of lukewarm coffee, when the radio on my hip crackled to life. Code red, Sector 4, Tank 309, leak confirmed, ignition probable. I didn't run. You don't run in a refinery unless something is actively exploding behind you. Running causes sparks, trips, and panic. I moved with the brisk, calculated efficiency of someone who had spent 24 years walking these metal gratings. I was 45 years old, and I knew every bolt, valve, and pressure gauge in this place better than I knew my own children's class schedules. I was the lead safety officer and the only certified master foam technician on shift. In fact, I was the only one certified for Class B fires within 3 counties. By the time I reached the staging area, the heat was already rising. Tank 309 was a monster, a floating roof tank holding crude oil. Smoke, black and oily, was already curling up from the rim seal. It wasn't a full-blown inferno yet, but it was breathing. It was waiting. Get the lines out. Move, move, move. The voice was shrill, panicked, and entirely too loud. It belonged to Captain Jacob Moore. Moore had been transferred here 3 months ago from a municipal department. He was good at structure fires, burning houses, wood, drywall, but he didn't know hydrocarbons. He didn't understand that an oil fire was a living, breathing beast that you couldn't just bully into submission with water. He was 30 years old, had a jawline that could cut glass, and an ego that filled the entire control room. I adjusted my hard hat and stepped up beside him. The heat from the tank was already distorting the air, making the distant distillation towers wobble like a mirage. "Captain," I said, my voice level, "wind is out of the nor-northeast at 10 knots. We need to stage the foam trailer upwind." "Do not, I repeat, do not put water on that rim seal yet. You'll sink the roof." Moore turned to me. His eyes were wide, the whites showing all around the iris. He was scared, but he was covering it with aggression. He looked at my grease-stained coveralls, then at the safety lead patch on my chest. "I didn't ask for an opinion, Taylor," he snapped. "I asked for lines. We need cooling. Veda, get the monitor guns on that tank wall now." Veda, a rookie barely out of her teens, looked between us. She was holding the heavy brass nozzle of a monitor gun, her knuckles white. She looked terrified. "Captain," I stepped between him and Veda. "If you hit a hot tank wall with cold water without establishing a foam blanket first, you risk a boil over. You need the AFFF concentrate. We need to smother it, not drown it." "I am the incident commander." Moore roared, spit flying from his mouth. "Get out of my way, Taylor. You're slowing down the response." "I am the foam tech," I countered, stepping closer. I wasn't intimidated by his shouting. I'd stared down fires that roared louder than a jet engine. "And that tank is filled with sour crude. If you splash water into the seal, it expands 1,700 times. You will blow the roof off, and you will kill everyone on this pad." The air grew heavy, not just from the smoke, but from the silence of the crew. Micah, the union rep and a burly pipefitter, stopped unrolling a hose. He looked at Moore, waiting. They all knew I was right. They knew that when Ellen Taylor spoke about fire, you listened. But Moore couldn't handle the silence. He couldn't handle a 45-year-old woman telling him his strategy was lethal in front of his new crew. I gave a direct order. Moore screamed, his face turning a blotchy red. "Water, now." "No," I said firmly. I put a hand on Veda's shoulder. "Stand down, Veda. Do not open that valve." That was the moment the world shifted. It wasn't the explosion of the tank. That hadn't happened yet. It was the explosion of Captain Moore's pride. The silence on the tarmac lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but it felt like an hour. The only sound was the low, menacing hiss of the leaking gas igniting around the rim of tank 309. Moore looked at Veda, who had frozen under my hand. Then he looked at Micah, who had lowered the hose. Then he looked at me. His eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. "You are insubordinate," Moore said. His voice was dangerously quiet now, a low tremor that was scarier than the shouting. "I am preventing a catastrophe," I replied, keeping my gaze locked on his. "Call the foam truck. Let me mix the ratio. We can kill this in 10 minutes if we do it right." "You don't run this fire ground," Moore hissed. He stepped into my personal space, towering over me. "I do, and I don't take orders from foam techs. I don't care how many certificates you have on your wall." He reached for his radio. "Security, this is command. I need an escort to Sector 4 immediately." My stomach dropped. "Jacob, don't do this. Look at the smoke. It's turning gray. That means the seal is melting. If you don't foam it now." "That's Captain Moore to you," he spat. 2 security guards and a patrol truck rolled up a moment later, tires crunching on the gravel. They looked confused, seeing no active fighting, just a standoff. "Escort Ms. Taylor off the property," Moore said, pointing a gloved finger at the gate. "She is relieved of duty. Effective immediately. Gross insubordination during a code red event." "You can't be serious," Micah shouted, stepping forward. "She's the only one who knows how to operate the proportioner on the main truck. You fire her, you got nobody to mix the AFFF." "I can read a manual, Micah." Moore yelled back, not looking away from me. "Get her out of here and take her badge. I don't want her back on site." One of the guards, a guy named Steve who I'd shared lunch with for 10 years, looked at me with apologetic eyes. "Ellen, I, the captain, ordered it." "It's okay, Steve," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. I reached up and unclipped my badge, the one that gave me access to the high-security chemical zones. The plastic felt heavy in my hand. I looked at Veda. She was crying. "Do exactly what the manual says, Veda. If he orders water on the crude, run. Don't argue, just run." "That is enough," Moore barked. "Get her out." Steve gently took my arm. "Come on, Ellen, let's go." I looked at Moore one last time. He was already turning his back on me, grabbing the radio to bark orders at the water pump operators. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom, totally unaware that the dragon behind him was waking up. "You're making a mistake, Captain," I said, loud enough for the whole crew to hear. "That fire is going to eat you alive." "Go," he screamed. I turned and walked toward the security truck. As I climbed into the passenger seat, I saw Moore grab the nozzle from Veda's hands. He pointed it toward the top of the tank. "Open the hydrants." Moore's voice echoed over the PA system. I closed the truck door just as the first jet of high-pressure water hit the superheated steel of tank 309. The drive from Sector 4 to the main gate was usually a 5-minute crawl at the mandated 15 miles per hour. Today, it felt like a funeral procession. Steve drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "He's crazy, Ellen," Steve finally whispered. "You know he's crazy, right? Sending water onto a floating roof. The seal is compromised." "I know, Steve," I said, staring out the window. We passed the administration building, then the large, gleaming pipes of the distillation units. I had spent half my life here. I had missed birthdays, anniversaries, and school plays to keep this place safe. I had fought 3 major fires in 20 years and never lost a single containment battle. And now, I was being kicked out like a criminal because a man with 3 months of experience didn't like my tone. When we reached the main gate, Steve parked the truck. He looked like he wanted to say something profound, but all he could manage was, "I'm sorry." "Not your fault," I said. I opened the door and stepped out onto the public asphalt. The heat of the day was oppressive, humid, and sticky. I had to walk to my own car, a beat-up sedan parked in the employee lot. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably now that the adrenaline was wearing off. The humiliation washed over me. Fired for trying to save them. I got into my car and slammed the door. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive back through the gate and shake Mr. Thompson, the plant manager, until he understood what his new hire was doing. But Thompson was probably hiding under his desk. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot. I turned onto the highway that ran parallel to the refinery. I should have gone straight home. I should have driven away and never looked back. But I couldn't. About a mile down the road, there was a scenic overlook, a spot usually reserved for tourists taking pictures of the industrial skyline at sunset. I pulled over. I got out and looked back at the refinery. From this distance, the plant looked like a complex city of silver and gray. But in the center, rising from Sector 4, the smoke column had changed. When I left, it was a thin, black ribbon. Now it was a thick, angry mushroom cloud billowing upwards with terrifying speed. It was pitch black, darker than night. That meant incomplete combustion. It meant the heavy crude was burning. And then I saw it. A flash of bright orange, followed by a dull thump that I felt in my chest before I heard it. A fireball rolled up into the sky, swallowing the top of the tank. "He sank the roof," I whispered to the empty air. Moore had dumped water onto the seal. The water had flashed to steam, expanded, and destabilized the floating roof. The roof had tilted and sunk into the burning oil, exposing the entire surface area of the tank to the fire. The beast was off the leash. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Veda. I answered. All I heard was screaming and the roar of a jet engine. "Ellen, he lost the roof. We're pulling back. The heat is, oh God, the heat." "Get to the muster point, Veda." I shouted into the phone. "Get upwind." "He's trying to use the foam truck," she cried. "But the pressure isn't building. Nothing is coming out." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean nothing is coming out?" "The inductor," she screamed. "He doesn't know how to prime the inductor. It's just spraying water." I squeezed the phone so hard the plastic creaked. I was the only one who knew the quirk of that specific inductor valve. You had to turn it a quarter turn past the click to engage the suction. "Tell him to turn the bypass valve." I yelled. "He won't listen. He's throwing the radio." The line went dead. I stood there on the side of the highway, watching the black smoke blot out the sun. It was 3:00 p.m. The fire had just started, but I knew, with a sick feeling in my gut, that it wouldn't be out by dinner. I got back in my car. I didn't go back to the plant. There was nothing I could do there but get arrested for trespassing. I drove home, the smoke following me in the rearview mirror like a dark omen. I pulled into my driveway at 3:45 p.m. My hands were still shaking as I killed the engine. It was a modest house, a small bungalow with peeling paint and a yard that needed mowing, the kind of place you end up in when you prioritize a demanding job over home maintenance for 2 decades. The first thing I did was walk to the backyard. I could see the plume from my porch. It was massive now, a bruise spreading across the clear blue afternoon sky. The wind was carrying it south, directly over the residential neighborhoods of Deer Park. My phone started blowing up. Texts from coworkers, confused calls from the dispatch center asking where I was, and one frantic voicemail from Mr. Thompson. I ignored them all. I went inside, poured a glass of tap water, and sat at my kitchen table. I turned on the local news. Breaking news: major fire reported at the Sterling refinery. Residents in the immediate vicinity are being advised to shelter in place. The helicopter shot showed the devastation clearly. Tank 309 was fully engulfed. The floating roof I had warned Moore about was gone, sunk into the burning crude. The flames were leaping 200 feet into the air, dwarfing the surrounding tanks. And worse, I could see the foam truck parked too close, abandoned. They had retreated without setting up a proper monitor. "He lost the truck," I whispered, horrified. "That truck was our primary weapon. It carried the high-capacity inductor and 500 gallons of AFFF concentrate. If they had abandoned it, they had no way to apply foam remotely. They were fighting a crude oil fire with garden hoses." My phone rang again. It was Veda. I picked up instantly. "Ellen." Her voice was small, choked with tears and smoke. "We're at the secondary muster point. He blamed you." "What?" I gripped the phone. "Moore. He told Thompson you sabotaged the equipment before you left. He said that's why the foam didn't flow. He said you tampered with the inductor." The audacity took my breath away. "He what?" "He's saying you endangered the crew. Thompson is talking about calling the police, Ellen. They want to pin this on you." I hung up. The fear vanished, replaced by a cold, hard knot of fury. This wasn't just incompetence anymore. This was a setup. Moore knew he had screwed up and he needed a scapegoat fast. A 45-year-old woman he had just publicly fired was the perfect target. I needed help. I needed someone who understood the game better than I did. I needed Weston. Weston Lee had been a scrawny kid when I trained him 10 years ago. Smart, ambitious, but reckless. He had nearly blown himself up during a routine flare inspection because he skipped a safety check. I had caught it, fixed it, and instead of reporting him, which would have ended his career, I had given him a lecture that made him cry and then spent 3 weeks retraining him on my own time. He never forgot it. He left the refinery a year later, joined the EPA, and climbed the ladder fast. Now, he was a regional investigator with the authority to shut down entire plants. I scrolled through my contacts until I found his number. It had been 2 years since we spoke. He answered on the second ring. "Ellen, I'm seeing the news. Tell me you're safe." "I'm at home, Wheeze," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I got fired." There was a pause. "Fired today during this." "Before it," I corrected. "I tried to stop Moore from putting water on a rim seal fire. He kicked me off site. Now he's telling everyone I sabotaged the foam truck." "Jesus," Weston breathed. "Okay, talk to me. Walk me through the timeline, everything." I told him everything. The initial alarm, the wind direction, the specific type of crude in tank 309, the argument, the order to use water, the failure to prime the inductor. "He didn't know about the quarter turn on the valve, did he?" Weston asked. He remembered. God, he remembered. No, he didn't. "Okay," Weston said, his voice sharpening into professional mode. "Here's what's going to happen. You are going to sit tight. Do not talk to anyone from the refinery. Do not talk to the press. Let them spin their story. The more they lie, the deeper they dig their grave. They're going to come for me, Wheeze. Thompson is weak. He'll back Moore to save his own pension." "Let them come," Weston said darkly. "I'm already in the car. I was heading to a site in Louisiana, but I'm turning around. I'll be in Deer Park in 3 hours. And Ellen." "Yeah." "Did you log the maintenance on that truck?" "Every week for 6 years," I said. "The logs are in my locker. Or they were." "If they destroy those logs," Weston said, "they go to federal prison. I'll make sure of it. Sit tight." I hung up and looked out the window. The sky was turning a sickly orange as the sun began to set behind the smoke. The silence in my house was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos I knew was unfolding just 5 miles away. The news was reporting that the fire had spread to a second tank, Tank 308. He didn't cool the exposures, I realized. Moore had been so focused on the first tank that he forgot to keep the neighboring tanks cool. The radiant heat had ignited the next one. It was amateur hour, and the whole city was paying the price. Weston arrived at 8:00 p.m. He didn't knock, he just walked in, looking like a storm cloud in a suit. He tossed a file folder on my table. "It's bad, Ellen," he said without preamble. "Local news is already running with sabotage suspected headlines. They aren't naming you yet, but they're quoting sources inside the investigation. That's more leaking to cover his ass." He pulled out a laptop and flipped it open. "But here's the thing about fires, they leave evidence. And here's the thing about modern refineries, they have cameras everywhere." "They'll delete the footage," I said, pouring him a coffee. "They can try," Weston grinned, a predatory expression I hadn't seen since he caught a contractor dumping waste in a storm drain. "But the EPA has remote access to perimeter monitoring cameras for emission tracking. I pulled the feed from Tower 4 before I even got here." He turned the laptop toward me. The grainy footage showed Sector 4 from a high angle. I watched myself arguing with Moore. I watched him point to the gate. I watched the security truck drive away. And then, crucially, I watched Moore pick up the nozzle. I watched him struggle with the foam truck valves. I watched him kick the tire in frustration when it didn't work. And then I watched him abandon the truck and order the water cannons. "He never even tried to call maintenance," Weston said, pointing at the screen. "He just gave up and switched to water. That's negligence, plain and simple, but that's not the smoking gun." "What is?" Weston tapped a key, freezing the video on a frame of the foam truck. "Look at the placard on the side of the tote. Can you read the batch number? I squinted, barely. Why? Because, Weston said, leaning back, I ran the purchase orders for the refinery's AFFF supply on my way here. Federal database. They haven't bought a new batch of foam concentrate in 5 years. My jaw dropped. That's impossible. Shelf life is 10 years, but we cycle it out every 3. Wait, we requested a cycle out last year. I signed the purchase order myself. You signed the request, Weston corrected, but the purchase was never made. The budget was allocated, but the money went somewhere else. And guess who signs off on the final budget approval for emergency supplies? Thompson, I guessed. Thompson signs it, Weston nodded, but the department head submits the vendor invoice. The previous chief retired 6 months ago. Moore took over. And in those 6 months, there was a correction to the inventory logs claiming the foam was still good for another 2 years. He falsified the inventory. To save $50,000 in his first quarter, Weston said, he wanted to look like a budget hero. He kept the money in the general operating fund to pay for, get this, a renovation of the administration offices. I stared at him. He let the fire safety equipment rot to buy new desks. And now the fire is burning because the old foam, what little was left, had separated. It was sludge. That's why it wouldn't flow. It wasn't the valve, Ellen. The inductor was clogged with expired gelatinous foam. So he fired me. He fired you because you would have known, Weston finished. If you had tried to flow that foam, you would have seen the sludge immediately. You would have called it out. He needed you gone before you could expose him. The fire outside cast a flickering orange glow on the walls of my kitchen. The pieces were falling into place. It wasn't just incompetence, it was criminal negligence. So what do? I asked. Weston closed the laptop. We wait. Let the fire burn a little longer. Let him panic. When he realizes he can't put it out, he's going to get desperate. And that's when we nail him. The fire didn't just burn, it consumed. By the second day, the black plume was visible from 3 counties away. The air quality index in Deer Park hit hazardous levels, and schools were closed. People were evacuating voluntarily, packing their cars with pets and valuables, terrified by the apocalyptic sky. I sat in my living room, watching it all unfold on the news. The refinery had declared a level 3 emergency, the highest possible. They had called in mutual aid from every department within 100 miles. But without foam, water was useless against a hydrocarbon fire of that magnitude. It was just steam and noise. Weston set up a command center on my dining table. He was monitoring everything: EPA air sensors, police scanners, internal refinery communications he had acquired access to. They're losing tank 308, he said on the morning of day 3. Structure integrity is failing. I watched the live feed. The second tank, the one Moore had ignored to focus on the first, was buckling. The heat was so intense it was warping the steel plates. If it collapsed, it would spill thousands of gallons of burning fuel into the containment dike. And if the dike failed? Sector 5 is next, I whispered. That's the process unit, high-pressure gas lines. Thompson is holding a press conference in an hour, Weston said, checking his watch. He's going to try to spin this. We watched it together. Thompson looked pale and sweaty, standing at a podium in the parking lot of a local high school. Moore stood behind him, looking grim but defiant. We are doing everything possible to contain the blaze, Thompson stammered. We suspect sabotage of key safety equipment by a disgruntled former employee. I gasped. He actually said it. We are cooperating fully with authorities, Thompson continued, glancing nervously at Moore. But our priority remains public safety. My phone rang. It was Veda. Ellen, she was crying openly now. They're interviewing everyone. Moore is telling the investigators you messed with the proportioner valves before you left. He says you were angry about the shift changes. Veda, listen to me, I said, my voice hard. Did you see me touch the truck? No. Of course not. But he's got logs, Ellen. He showed them a maintenance log with your signature on it from last week, saying the system was operational. "That's a lie," I said. "I haven't signed a maintenance log in 2 weeks because the truck was out of service for a brake repair. The logbook should reflect that." "He has a new logbook," Veda whispered. "He made us sign it yesterday. He backdated everything." I looked at Weston. He was already typing furiously. "He's forging documents," Weston said. "That's federal obstruction. We got him." But getting him didn't stop the fire. By day 4, the smoke was so thick you couldn't see the sun at noon. The National Guard was being deployed to help with evacuations. And then, on the morning of day 5, the wind shifted. It began blowing directly toward the main administration building and the control room. The call came at 10:14 a.m. on day 5. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Ellen, this is Thompson." His voice was trembling so badly I could barely understand him. "Mr. Thompson," I said coldly, "to what do I owe the pleasure? I believe I'm a disgruntled former employee who sabotaged your plant." "Please," he begged. "Forget what I said. We need you. The wind. It's pushing the fire toward the process unit, if that goes up." "You have mutual aid," I said. "You have the state fire marshal." "They don't know the system," he cried. "The foam truck is useless." The marshal brought in a specialized foam trailer from Houston, but nobody here knows how to hook it into our hydrant system. The threads are different. They need an adapter, and nobody knows where the adapters are kept. I closed my eyes, of course. The adapters were in a locked cabinet in the old warehouse, a relic from when the plant was built in the 70s. Only 3 people knew the combination: me, the old chief who retired, and the maintenance lead who was currently on vacation in Florida. "Where is Captain Moore?" I asked. He's overwhelmed," Thompson admitted. "He's in the command trailer, arguing with the marshal." "So you want me to come back," I said slowly, "after you accused me of a felony on national television?" "I'll retract it," Thompson practically screamed. "I'll issue a public apology. Just please, come help us hook up the foam. If the process unit goes, we lose the whole refinery, maybe the whole neighborhood." I looked at Weston. He nodded. "Go," he mouthed, "but on your terms." "I have conditions," I said. "Anything," Thompson sobbed. "Name it." "1," I said. "I want that apology in writing, signed by you and Moore before I step foot on site. 2, I want full incident command authority for the duration of the event. More answers to me. And 3." I paused. "I want a consulting fee, triple my hourly rate, paid up front." "Done," Thompson said instantly. "Just get here." I hung up. Weston was grinning. "Get your gear," he said. "It's showtime." The scene at the main gate was chaotic. Police cars, fire trucks from 5 different counties, and news vans were everywhere. The smoke was a wall of gray, choking, and acrid. Thompson met me at the perimeter. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He shoved a piece of paper into my hand. "Here," he panted. "The apology, signed, now please." I glanced at it. It was hasty, scrawled on refinery letterhead, but it was there. "We retract all allegations of sabotage against Ellen Taylor." "Good enough," I said, pocketing it. I didn't wait for an escort. I drove my car straight through the gate, past the checkpoints, right up to the staging area in Sector 4. The heat was intense. Even inside the car with the AC blasting, I could feel it radiating through the glass. I got out and was immediately hit by a wall of noise. The roar of the fire was deafening. I saw the Houston Fire Department crew struggling with a massive yellow foam trailer. They were trying to force a 5-inch stores coupling onto a 4-inch threaded hydrant. It wasn't going to fit. "Stop!" I yelled, running toward them. A burly captain from Houston turned. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the one who knows where the adapters are." I shouted over the roar. I ran to the nearby warehouse, a corrugated metal shed that looked ready to melt. The padlock was rusted shut. I didn't have the combination, and I didn't have time. I looked around. A fire axe was mounted on the wall of a nearby truck. I grabbed it. With 2 swings, I smashed the lock. I kicked the door open and ran to the back shelf. There, dusty but intact, was the crate labeled "Emergency Fittings, 1985." I grabbed the heavy brass adapters, 4-inch thread to 5-inch stores. I grabbed 4 of them. I ran back to the Houston crew. Here, use these. The captain looked at me with relief. Thank God, someone who actually knows this place. Within 3 minutes, the connections were made. The massive diesel pump on the trailer roared to life. Charge the line. I ordered. For the first time in 5 days, a coherent stream of white foam shot into the air. It wasn't water. It was a thick, beautiful blanket of suppression agent. More. I screamed, spotting him by the command trailer. He looked small, defeated, his face soot-stained and pale. He saw me. He didn't argue. He just looked at the foam arc with wide, terrified eyes. Get the monitors on the exposure tanks. I commanded, pointing at Vader and Micah, who were watching with open mouths. Cool the steel. Houston, hit the base of the flame. Smother it. For the next 4 hours, we fought. It was a grueling, calculated battle. We built a foam blanket inch by inch, pushing the fire back, suffocating the beast. By sunset, the roar had died down to a hiss. The black smoke turned white. The flames, which had raged for 120 hours, flickered and died. We had won. I stood there, covered in soot, sweat, and foam residue. The silence returned to the refinery. Mr. Thompson walked up to me, flanked by Weston, who had apparently slipped through the gate during the chaos. "Ellen," Thompson said, his voice weak. "You did it. You saved the plant." "I saved the neighborhood," I corrected, wiping my forehead. "The plant can rot for all I care." I turned to Weston. "Did you get it?" Weston held up a clear plastic bag. Inside was a sample of the sludge from the original foam truck's tank, the one Moore had abandoned. "Sample secured," Weston said. "Chain of custody established. We're sending it to the lab to prove it was expired." Moore walked over, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "Well," he coughed. "Good work, Taylor. I suppose we can discuss your reinstatement." I laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Reinstatement. I looked at him, then at Thompson, then at the smoking ruin of Tank 309. "I don't work for criminals, Jacob. I'm just here for the consulting fee." The fire was technically out by 8:00 p.m., but the aftermath was just beginning. While the Houston crews began the long process of cooling down the twisted metal of Tank 309, Weston was busy. He had turned the command trailer into a makeshift interrogation room. He had the authority of the federal government behind him, and he wasn't afraid to use it. I sat on the tailgate of a pickup truck, drinking a bottle of water that tasted like smoke. Veda came over and sat next to me. She looked exhausted, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't know what to do. He kept screaming at us." "You did good, Veda," I said, putting an arm around her. "You survived. That's the first rule of this job." Behind us in the trailer, voices were raised. I could hear more shouting, then Thompson's frantic pleading, then a heavy silence. 10 minutes later, the door opened. 2 state troopers walked out, flanking a man in handcuffs. It was Captain Moore. He didn't look arrogant anymore. He looked small. He looked like a child caught stealing candy, except the candy was $50,000 of safety budget and the consequences were a 5-day inferno. Thompson followed, looking like he might vomit. He wasn't in cuffs yet, but he was clearly terrified. Weston stepped out last, holding a file folder. He walked over to me. "We got him," Weston said quietly. "Full confession. He admitted to falsifying the inventory logs to hide the expired foam. He admitted to diverting the funds for the office renovation. And get this, he admitted to ordering you off-site specifically because he knew you'd catch him." "And the sabotage claim?" I asked. "He made it up," Weston confirmed. "On the spot, to cover his ass when the foam failed. He thought he could blame you for the equipment failure he caused." I watched as they put Moore into the back of a police cruiser. He didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "What about Thompson?" I asked. "Complicit," Weston said. "He signed off on the budget diversion. He knew the foam hadn't been replaced. He just didn't think it would matter. He'll be facing charges too. Reckless endangerment, fraud, environmental crimes. The list is long." The flashing lights of the cruiser, reflected in the puddles of oily water and foam on the ground. It was a chaotic, beautiful mess. You realize, Weston said, looking at the charred remains of the tank farm, that this place is going to be shut down for months, maybe forever. The EPA isn't going to let them operate until a full audit is done. Good, I said. They don't deserve to operate. I stood up, my knees popped. I felt every one of my 45 years. I'm going home, Wheeze, I said. I need a shower and a drink and maybe a new career. The next few weeks were a blur of depositions, legal meetings, and media interviews. The story broke wide open. Refinery fire caused by embezzlement and negligence, the headlines screamed. Hero safety officer vindicated. Captain arrested for fraud. My face was everywhere. The local news wanted to interview the woman who saved the town. I declined most of them. I wasn't interested in fame, I just wanted the truth out. Weston handled the legal side. He presented the evidence, the video footage, the sludge sample, the falsified logs, the confession to a grand jury. The indictment came down swiftly. Jacob Moore was charged with 20 counts of reckless endangerment, wire fraud, and falsifying government records. He was looking at 15 years in federal prison. Mr. Thompson took a plea deal. He resigned immediately, paid a massive fine, and agreed to testify against Moore in exchange for a lighter sentence. As for the refinery, the EPA shut it down indefinitely. The investigation revealed rot that went far deeper than just the foam. Corroded pipes, bypassed safety valves, untrained staff. It was a disaster waiting to happen. I received a settlement check from the company's insurance. It was substantial, enough to pay off my mortgage and then some. It was their way of saying, sorry for ruining your reputation and nearly burning down your neighborhood. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was the letter I received from the state fire marshal. It was a commendation for exceptional bravery and technical expertise under extreme duress. It was signed by the governor. I framed it and hung it in my hallway, right next to the picture of me and Veda covered in soot. Veda had quit the refinery the day after the fire. She went back to school to finish her engineering degree. She called me sometimes to ask for advice on thermodynamics or fluid dynamics. She was going to be a hell of an engineer one day, and me, I didn't go back, I couldn't, the trust was broken. I had given 20 years to a place that was willing to sacrifice me for a budget line item. I took some time off. I fixed up my house. I planted a garden. I started sleeping through the night without waking up in a panic, but I wasn't done with fire safety. I sat on my back porch watching the sunset. The sky was clear, a brilliant orange and purple. No black smoke. No sirens, just the sound of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. I had started my own consulting firm, Taylor Safety Solutions. It turned out that companies were terrified of becoming the next headline. They were desperate for someone who could audit their systems, train their crews, and tell them the hard truth before it was too late. I was booked solid for the next year. I traveled to plants all over the country. I walked the lines, checked the valves, and looked captains in the eye. I taught rookies like Veda how to spot a bad seal, how to read a wind shift, and most importantly, how to stand their ground when a superior gave a dangerous order. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Weston. Verdict is in, guilty on all counts. Sentencing next month. I smiled. Justice was slow, but it had arrived. Jacob Moore would have a long time to think about the difference between water and foam in a federal cell. I put the phone down and took a sip of iced tea. The air smelled sweet, like jasmine and freshly cut grass. It was the smell of a world that hadn't burned down, thanks to a few people who refused to stay silent.